Panditji, why were they writing whatever they were doing? Like even in the case of Christianity, the pious fraud that they were committing, they admitted to that in writing.
Remember, there was a time when the sun never set on the British Empire. They never dreamed for a moment that this would ever end. It didn't occur to them that there would be a demise in their control on the narrative.
Wow.
It was a shock and a horror to them. This is the scale of their arrogance.
True. That makes so much sense. I always wonder when I read church fathers, I always wonder why these church fathers were admitting to their fraud, their forgeries, their lies, their deceit. There is a ton of literature from each of these fathers, church fathers, that admits to whatever they were doing by deceit.
I say there is evidence in their own words of a malicious intent, and the only justification is that they were all thieves together.
Yes.
Right? Collectively, as a civilization, they were a pirate nation, built on robbery and theft and violence, and this was business as normal for them. And the accounts that the Church of England keeps are meticulous. As I'm sure you know, the churches keep unbelievable accounts, and it was no different with the British East India Company, and indeed whatever happened afterwards. And you know, it is just hubris on a scale which is unimaginable. But if you have a think about it, what's happened in Afghanistan just now, where the Americans have fled with their tail sort of between their legs, they too never imagined. I don't think anybody conceived of a situation where they would leave in that manner, and with such humiliation. And it's exactly the same in Bharat. They never imagined it would happen. In fact, it's been often spoken about, hasn't it? Why was the Radcliffe line drawn in such a haphazard manner? What was the purpose behind it? And, you know, as people progress, the purpose behind it is going to be revealed as being more evil than we ever thought.
Right.
The purpose behind it is going to be revealed to be even more malicious than we ever thought. And for 6 weeks prior to their departure, they were burning documents and papers in every administrator's office. And what couldn't be burned was loaded onto ships and shipped back here to the United Kingdom. And it was so that the mystery, the story of the British Empire, you know, they gave us independence, and they brought all these uncivilized nations into a commonwealth of nations. You know, it's a complete fraud. It is an utter fabrication, and its purpose is to conceal the depravity that they inflicted on people of a non-white, non-Christian, non-European origin. It's the scale is huge.
Right, right. Same thing, same case with the Roman Catholic Church. They never ever dreamed that a day would come when these narratives would be controlled by somebody else other than them. So which is
Precisely.
why they went all out and they didn't hide anything, and they just kept writing about their deceit.
The Church of England is nothing other than a franchise of the Ponzi scheme, the scam that the Roman Catholic Church constructed.
You said that.
It's just a sub-franchise, that's all it is.
Yeah.
And it's a fraud. It is asat, it is hinsa, it is avidya, it is adharm. And that's how we need to see it.
Correct.
None of this nonsense about freedom of religion and all of that stuff.
Nothing divine at all.
Nothing whatsoever. In fact, it's the greatest evidence of the existence of Satan that I've ever come across.
Yes, yes. There is an interesting picture in your book, and an even more interesting caption that goes with it. And the caption says, "The British forced a caste system on India, blamed the Hindus, and then sent hordes of missionaries to help them get rid of it. Meanwhile, in England, hereditary hierarchical privilege, the British caste system, alive and kneeling." So is there a caste system in Britain?
Yes, there is. In fact, if you look at Europe's history, it's not just Britain, throughout Europe, the caste system is fundamental to the way in which they stratified their society. And you need to understand that the purpose of a caste system is to, one, preserve power and wealth amongst a limited number of families for a long period of time, across the generations. Okay, this is one of its objectives. Another objective is to ensure that people remain confined to the labor and the activity that you have prescribed for them, for the benefit and for the satisfaction of the objectives that the ruling class create. Okay, so there are a group at the top who are managing a country in exactly the same way as a business is managed. Okay, so if you can imagine a corporation, and a Varna-based system would say, okay, the people who are good with numbers, I'm going to put them in the accounting department because that's their natural aptitude. The guys who are great with sales, I'm going to put them into the sales department because they really want to talk and they have a great time painting pictures and everything else, and they'll make great salespeople. That's how a Varna-based system does. It matches attribute with occupation and fulfillment. The caste-based system said, no, if you were born a serf or a peasant, you would always remain a serf or a peasant, and your children would remain serfs or peasants. Okay. And so we have a royal family. It's hereditary, it's hierarchical, it controls a huge amount of assets which are available only to them, and generally speaking, the aristocracy, those with blue blood, those are the ones who marry in their own circle, their own communities, and that's endogamy. In fact, when our Prince William married Kate Middleton, there was a lot of talk that actually, oh my goodness, he's married a commoner. Okay, so that word common appears there as well, and it's not a coincidence that it's also in commonwealth, right? The commonwealth was actually the wealth of the common man, which the British institutions and hierarchy wanted to have control over. That's why it's called the Commonwealth. It's not that it's a wealth of nation for the common good. That would be entirely inconsistent with the traditional use of the word common, as in the commoner or the common man. And so we do have a hereditary, hierarchical and endogamous system. Now it's very skillfully concealed, and it's only probably in the last decade that cracks have been sort of begun to appear. But we have this system, and it has been sold to the British public as well. The skill with which the imagery has been presented, the skill with which the institutions of state domination are clothed with magnificent structures. If you enter into the Houses of Parliament, you're being told a story from the moment you approach the building. You're being conditioned and programmed to be receptive to a certain form of authority, to accept a certain form of governance and institutional structures. And the British were wonderful with this narrative. We have this story of Ravan being Mayavi, that he could weave illusion. Right? Well, this is what you experience when you wander around the British establishments and look at the stories that are being told in the paintings and the sculptures. It's Maya being woven. And this is what they have done so successfully. So much so that we will have a Prime Minister bend her knee in front of a prince of the royal family. If that isn't a caste system in action and visible, and not just in action and visible, but honestly and innocently being participated in by those who were ruled, that's the skill with which this caste system is wielded. Most people are inducted into it in their early years. In school we're taught, in the British schools we're taught about the Tudors and the Elizabethans and Henry VIII and everything else, but there's a big gap when it comes to the British Empire. Right? All of a sudden you miss that, and then you come to World War II. And even in World War II, the contribution of the Bharatiya citizens has until recently been completely overlooked. And so there are edited bits out which are always preparing a person. A story is being told, normally at a time when you don't have a faculty of reason. And so a person grows up accepting a caste system which is so skillfully gilded and presented in 24-karat gold plate. But it's very much present, and it exists, and it's the role model. It's the cookie cutter template which was enforced through violence on peoples around the globe who didn't want to be ruled that way, who had a better way for human beings to exist. A dharmic civilization is a better model.
Panditji, coming to the book itself, you've talked a little bit about this while answering another question of mine, but I want you to talk about the purpose of writing it. What made you actually leave everything else and sit down and write this book?
It's a wonderful question because it took me a long time, and it involved a lot of sacrifices, most of all by my family, who had to put up with me reading through dusty books and trying to find old records. It came at significant cost. But there was a very important reason. One, I was confident that the way in which our community had been demeaned and vilified by the British establishment, without any evidence, was not an accident. It was too well coordinated. If you watch the speeches in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, it would be deemed to be hate speech in today's modern terms. And yet it happened and nobody really batted an eyelid. And you'll have read some of the very direct challenges I've included in the book, where people have tried to deflect, and I've brought it back to a very simple understanding. My concern was that at this point in time we might have defeated their attempts to introduce caste into British law and enshrine discrimination into British law. And I thought that if we had managed to defeat it this time, in 10 years' time I will have moved on. The other people who came back and understood this, they may have gone back to their normal lives, and so we needed to put something on record which would prevent a person from making these false allegations ever again. And that meant it had to be recorded, it had to be presented. And so I gathered all of the notes and everything else and presented them in a report form to parliamentarians and to the Equalities and Human Rights Commission and people like that. And so that was done and dusted. And then I went back to my normal quiet life doing my sadhana and everything else. But then, last year, Isabel Wilkerson published her book, and the Cisco caste allegations appeared. And I saw that my attempts to dissolve caste consciousness had suddenly been undermined on a degree that I had never imagined. It was almost like a torpedo had hit the ship of my efforts. And Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, it is such a shallow, poor and shoddy understanding. In fact, it's I describe it in my book as an example of confirmation bias accompanied by atrocious research. But she popularized the word caste everywhere, and everybody was thinking of caste, and the moment anybody thinks of caste, they think of Hindu caste system. This is how successful a trope it is. And so I thought, no, this has to be challenged, because if what we managed to do here in the United Kingdom, our Hindus in the US don't manage to achieve, and it is enshrined into law, then we're back to square one. Non-Dalits, whether they're Hindus or they're Christians or whatever, will be vulnerable to an allegation of guilt by association without evidence, an assumption of guilt before law. And so I thought this has to be challenged. And so I gathered all of my notes, put it all together, and then published the book and released it in the United States. And it has been very well received there. I think I've really hit one of my targets, which was to help provide a roadmap to decolonizing our understanding of caste, because most of us Hindus were walking around with an understanding of caste which we've never really scrutinized. And I did all of the compare and contrast work, and then produced a step-by-step way of emerging from the colonialist understanding to a more healthy understanding of what Sanatana Dharma really did, one which would equip anybody to challenge the caste narrative. My hope was to give somebody a tool that they could just read, be decolonized about this issue, and then pass it on to somebody else, who would then be able to easily read it, gather an understanding that they need to know, and then move on to somebody else. Nice, simple, direct, straightforward, step-by-step decolonization of this issue. That was my intention and purpose, and judging by all accounts, I think we've made, if not complete, we've made a lot of progress in that direction.
So towards the end of your book, you have made a series of appeals. So the first appeal is to the Dalits, the second to the British Christians, the third appeal you made to the British pagans, fourth to Anglican clergy, and so on. Tell us about what the Dalits must know about the caste narrative and caste system, if we can even call it that.
I have very ambitious hopes for healing the rift between our communities, and I can see that our communities, there are more than enough people who want to see the rifts healed. There are more and more, I speak with many Dalit friends in Bharat as well now, and there are many who recognize that a poor Brahmin child is deprived of a stake in the nation of India when they are deemed to be a congenital discriminator. and therefore prevented of receiving equality in front of the state and in the receipt of public services. They recognize that. They recognize that that does not create a good relationship between that poor Brahmin child and another not so poor Dalit child. There's a natural divide and rule strategy being worked out in front of us. So we have to move to that stage where we can see this without the heat and without the guilt. Now, one thing that I did notice was that there are entrenched camps, and the entrenched camps haven't worked out how to talk to each other, because there is suffering on both sides. And I could see that equally there is a great deal of injustice done on all of the Hindus who are non-Dalits, and they are feeling the pain and the discomfort as a result. And on the other side, in the other camp, there is this notion of ancestral hatred and discrimination. And so when you have two people who have got vested interests, they've entrenched themselves, there's no conversation. And yet that conversation has to be precipitated. We have to make it happen. And so the book really is intended to give both groups a better understanding of how they've ended up where they are. I've revealed a portion of history which up until now people hadn't known. And if we do make everybody aware of this, they have to revisit the position, and they have to reconsider the possibility that they are actually pawns in somebody else's grander strategy. And who wants to be a pawn in somebody else's devious game? Nobody does. And if that simple understanding can, shall we say, propel a person to say, okay, I'm going to look a little bit deeper, then I think the work will happen. I have a great deal of belief and confidence in the dharmic heart of every Sanatani. I think somewhere deep down there is this desire, this awareness that we are part of an incredible civilization. And somewhere is our search for our own personal greatness. And I think there is room for that personal greatness to manifest if it's given the right nourishment and the right encouragement. And so that's my hope.
I'm very hopeful that together we will be able to erase this caste consciousness, which is your passion too.
Which is the objective. That is the ultimate goal. And you know, I'm really inspired by what I see many of our youngsters doing, whether it's I listen to conversations on Clubhouse, I see the YouTube videos, I read the comments, and there is a huge momentum which says we want to stop suffering and we don't want others to suffer either. And they're finding the vocabulary for it. And I think if the more vocabulary and the ideas and assistance we can give to them, the better it will be. And I'm seeing this happen. And I'm really inspired by the feedback I've had to the book. I've had a small number of people in Bharat now, actually like yourself, invest in the delay and the expense of getting it over from the States. But the response has been, wow, can we translate this into Kannada? Can we have this in Telugu? We want to be able to have copies of this so I can share them in Tamil Nadu. And so the message is right, it's there, and I think there's a thirst for it. And if we can get enough people to hear it, especially our youngsters, I think we'll see a quantum leap in dissolving caste consciousness. I had a lovely piece of feedback from an American Indian young lady, and she said, my boyfriend was speaking to me about caste, and he was, I felt vulnerable, but I'd read your book, so I gave him a copy of the book, and now he doesn't talk about it anymore. So it's valuable, it's having an impact, and as you say, it's the sort of thing I wanted to be shared. I wanted somebody to have something they could use, read it, maybe sitting on a train journey, and then just leave it somebody else to read it as well. Yeah. My hope is that many people will read it, and we want to make it available in that manner.
Yeah. So wish you all the best, and that's what I said, that this hope comes from the fact that so many people are talking about it, especially the youngsters, and in their own corner of their world, they're trying to bring a change. They're trying to do
Precisely.
Something so it changes for the better for all the communities.
Ji. Yeah. Let's have a sankalpa. My hope is that I can in my mind see and envisage a Bharat which has dissolved caste consciousness, and I can see the bulk of the work having been done within even the next 5 years. there is such a groundswell which says we don't want the pain that this causes us anymore,
Yes.
but it doesn't know how to deal with it, and I'm hoping that our work together can give them some tools which may be of help in dealing with it.
Absolutely. And Sankalpa is what we need at this time. Towards
that's
that
it.
goal. Yeah. So thank you.
Esther Ji, my pleasure.
Pandit
Thank
Ji.
you very much. I really appreciate the time and the support and the words of encouragement that you've given me on your journey as well. So I'm deeply indebted.
Absolutely. And
Jai
thank
Shri
you so
Ram.
much for
Thank
what you are doing in the hostile environment, Panditji, and pranams for that, for making the Hindu voices heard in a hostile environment. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. It wasn't by choice, but I seem to be, shall we say, well equipped to do it. So, ठीक है, Swabhav and Swadharma have united, and the rest is up to Sri Krishna Ji. And Jai Shri Ram Ji. Jai Shri Ram.
Thank you all for watching. Namaste.